Hello, everyone, and welcome to the final Inspiring Woman interview. I am psyched to be introducing Emily Dougherty today. As per usual, Jen Wells, co-founder of brandswan, and Emily is someone that brandswan knows and loves very much. She has worked with us for, I want to say, a couple of years now. Yeah. We worked with Emily to do yoga as a team, which was great. It was an absolutely amazing program. And we helped Emily launch a new brand. And we are super psyched to see the work that she's going out into the world and doing as a trauma-sensitive yoga and mindfulness facilitator and the founder of Embodied Brilliance. So go ahead, Emily, and I guess give us a little more background on what you do.
Relatively speaking, I first found trauma-sensitive yoga, found out that it was a thing in early 2018. That was right at the time where I had started to, or was certified to teach yoga, which is something I'd been wanting to do for probably a decade at that point. I was also simultaneously, and I don't think this is a coincidence by the universe in any means, but I was also at that time realizing my own trauma and identifying with being a survivor of complex trauma, which I can talk about, what that is and everything, developmental trauma. So it's sort of like I was coming to a point in my personal life that met my work life and really my newfound work. Before becoming a yoga instructor, I was just kind of doing any job that came up, and I wasn't a career person. I was just a person who had a job. This is really what I would consider like my first career. And so these two things, this kind of personal development and professional development, met at the same time. And I just knew instantly, this is what I want to do. And there weren't a lot of trainings out there, to be quite honest. This is still like a pretty new practice as far as like the label of trauma sensitive yoga. I think yoga in its essence is trauma sensitive. It just doesn't always come out that way, particularly, I think, in the West, how we have kind of adopted and turned it into whatever we've turned it into over here. It's gotten, I think, pretty far away from, its essence. So I actually think trauma-sensitive yoga is probably getting more back to kind of that essence of what yoga is supposed to be. And it really is, it's a practice of healing. So since then, I've taken other trainings. I most recently, during the pandemic, took my 300-hour training. So your first kind of big yoga training is your 200-hour, your second is your 300-hour. And that 300-hour training I took through the Center for Trauma and Embodiment. So I'm now certified to teach a specific model of trauma-sensitive yoga. That is, it's evidence-based research. They've been researching this for 20 years at this point, this particular place, the Center for Trauma and Embodiment. And that's what I offer now. So again, I'm fairly new. I guess I sort of feel like this last training has really like put me where I want to be focusing on, which is why I think, getting my brand together, my business name, my website, and all of that was just really good timing. So I'm sort of just emerging now kind of with this new work that I'm doing, I guess. I've taught classes and I've done a lot of trauma sensitive classes, just not with this new kind of model and certification under my belt.
I think one follow-up question, because so many people are reluctant to say that they have trauma. And I think maybe when people hear the word trauma, they're actually thinking of complex trauma, whereas trauma by itself, we all have experienced in some way. So maybe just explaining the difference between those.
So kind of, if you look at like the different definitions of trauma, there's acute trauma, shock trauma, or single incident trauma. They're all kind of names for one particular type of trauma, which is one single incident that happens. Trauma can also be defined as like something that happens too much, too fast, too soon. And it's the way that it affects your nervous system, your brain's ability to kind of process what's happening. It processes it in a different way than if something is not traumatic. So the pandemic, it is a single incident, but I think it's also chronic because it continues to happen. We're now 2 years of experiencing this. So I heard someone explain it as like shock trauma is like you get in a car accident. Complex or chronic trauma is like you get in a car accident every week. And you start to know that you're going to get in a car accident. So it's not, I mean, it's still shocking, but it's not out of the blue. So there's like single incident trauma, which is like a car accident. Chronic trauma is just long-term trauma that occurs over a period of time. So complex trauma is like, there's an umbrella of complex trauma, which is chronic, often relational trauma. Then under that umbrella, there's developmental trauma, which is when that type of trauma, that complex trauma, happens to you as a child. And it's normally from the relationship that you have with your caregiver, one or more. When you're surviving, you don't even know that you're traumatized. You're just moving through the world from the only place that you know. People with developmental trauma don't have a pre-trauma identity. So a lot of people get to like adulthood if they make it that long. And once they start to heal, they're kind of emerging out of this like fog. When you're surviving, it's like you just don't have the realization. When you come out of surviving, then it's like you have a knowing and you're also experiencing it at the same time. And so it's almost like this compounded, really foggy, really scary place. And that's really where my focus is with developmental trauma. Personally.
Perfect segue into how does trauma sensitive yoga and mindfulness help people who have experienced these kinds of traumas?
There's a researcher, Judith Herman, and she says the key components of psychological trauma is disempowerment and disconnection. Therefore, what helps to heal that type of trauma is empowerment and connection. So something like trauma sensitive yoga, first of all, what we now know is that trauma is stored in your body. So when something comes in to your world via your senses, we pick up things from our external worlds through our senses. It gets processed through our brain, and then it does X amount of processes to go wherever it needs to go. If something is metabolized essentially within yourself as a trauma, it ends up settling in your nervous system. It goes on a different path than like something would normally go through in your brain. So often when you get, when someone comes in and they're a survivor of complex trauma, you lose something called interoception, or it might be something that you never gained in the first place. And that's essentially understanding your internal sensations in your internal world, and then being able to make choices in your life based on those sensations. The idea, again, is empowerment and connection. So if someone is working with me, I'm trying to set up a space that we can essentially co-create together, that they might feel safe and supported enough to start to make choices, and not having to worry about, is it the right choice? What mindfulness kind of can add in is using different techniques. Like there's a practice that is not trauma sensitive yoga. It's called emotional freedom technique, or tapping, where you tap on different meridian points. I think there's 9 points, which uses like the like Chinese acupressure philosophy. And then it also adds in positive affirmations. So that's kind of where the mindfulness piece can come in, using different techniques like that. So my work is essentially blending a lot of these practices that not just I've learned can be helpful, but have actually helped me.
So this does not have to be related to trauma sensitive yoga, because I know you mentioned a couple times you're really just kind of ramping up now, but just in your career, in your life, what is an accomplishment that you're proud of that you consider to be significant for you?
Like I said in the beginning, like I mostly just had jobs before. So finding this work has been one of my most significant accomplishments. Particularly, I would say the last training that I did, the 300-hour training, it was like the better part of a year, pretty intense learning while simultaneously processing things on my own. And I would say over the last 10 years, I've probably been through, like I said, a couple of those cycles, a couple kind of dark night of the soul, where it's just like, what are you doing? You can't do this. Like, you're not qualified to do this. You think you are, definitely imposter syndrome. Certainly that can definitely apply to my life in many different times. There was something about this program, because I think most of the people, I don't know how many people there were, maybe over 100 people in this program, probably 90% of them would also consider themselves survivors. So you're sort of simultaneously learning this beautiful practice that can help others, and then you're all kind of supporting each other through it. just connecting to a big group of like-minded people in that way has been one of the most significant and really like healing and empowering experiences. I would say so far that's probably been the biggest thing.
All right, pop quiz. How do you define success?
I would say leading from your heart is my gauge of whether something is successful, regardless of the outcome. Because one thing I feel like has happened so many times, but it's a lesson you have to keep learning, is just that you can't do things sort of based on your perceived outcome of what should happen. And so I don't think it's about like, I don't think success, I guess, is about the outcome. It's about like the journey. It's about doing the thing in every step of the way versus just getting to that outcome that is going to supposedly, define your success. I think leading from your heart, regardless of the outcome, that would be my dictionary.com submission.
What wisdom or guidance would you share with your younger self if you could go back in time?
It was so foggy for me back then, but I think even amidst all the fog, I would try to encourage myself to trust my gut, to trust that inner voice, because I see so many times where I didn't, whether that was because I was trying to people please someone or just whatever it was. And at this point, I've given myself grace for it. Like, it happened. It's okay. I was doing the best I could. It was total survivor mode. But I think even through all of that, there was this voice that was trying to guide me, and I couldn't hear it. So now with my practices, it's like a lot of the spiritual practices I have are just to keep things quiet enough where I can hear that voice and it doesn't steer me wrong.